Hello folks, Sean Mize here, and today we'll dig deep into psychology for marketing. And actually it's going to be, when you see this, I think you're going to really like what I've put together here for you. It's really going to dig deep into the psychology of building relationships, and we're going to apply that to marketing. But the psychology that I include in here goes, frankly, a lot deeper than just marketing. Okay, now, obviously, in creating something like this, I want it to be what's relevant for marketing and present it to you in such a way that it's going to be easy for you to layer into your marketing. So let's go ahead and get started. The key idea here with psychology for marketing and psychology for relationship building, the question might be, why do we even need psychology? Why don't we just follow a formula? Why don't we just say 1, 2, 3, 4? These are the things that we do. Um, and truth be known, a lot of marketers tend to sort of follow a formula, and even those that follow a formula, my guess is those that are successful are implementing some of the psychological elements, even if they don't realize that they're doing it. So they may be thinking in terms of, okay, here's a formula, 7-step formula, but their natural ability, whether they're born with it or they studied it or whatever the case is allowing them to implement these pieces that allow the marketing to build naturally, as if it were an offline relationship. You see, building relationships online works just like building relationships offline. So what elements are required to build a relationship offline? So we obviously, if we're going to have a relationship, whether it's a friendship or whether it's a business relationship or any other kind of relationship, there's a number of building blocks that have to occur. Okay, and I'm obviously not going to list all of them, but I think that, we've all been involved in offline relationships. We know that we have to have a level of trust. We probably have a level of liking. In order for us to have a relationship with someone, we normally have to feel like they are consistent. Okay, so not necessarily, you know, um, one mood today and completely another one tomorrow. We'd almost rather have a relationship with someone that's always grouchy or always angry than then we cannot correctly anticipate what they're going to be like today. Okay? Well, building a relationship online works exactly the same. And I stress this because I think that so often marketers get into a mindset of, okay, all I've got to do is write these 10 emails that are optimized, or I write a sales letter and I follow a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 formula. I write a headline according to, the best 100 headlines of all time. And then I write a little story at the beginning and I ask some specific questions that I read in a book, and then I have some closing questions and I build value and I put a payment button there. And in a way, I think that in the early stages of internet marketing, when demand for a certain item was perhaps higher than it is now in relationship to supply. So in the past, if you had 1,000 people that needed a specific sort of information and only one person provided it, frankly, it didn't matter what the sales letter said. You'd probably have people buying it just because they needed it. Now maybe you have 1,000 people supplying, many, many more than 1,000 people that are demanding something, and now there begins to be competition. And when somebody sees a sales letter that doesn't really click with them, they have lots of choices. So the internet has changed an awful lot just in the last few years. Just one case in point is the speed of the internet. So if we look just back a few years ago, it might take 30 seconds for a page to fully open. And if you didn't like what was there, you hit the back button. It'd take another 30 seconds to go to the search engine, and you got to hunt around for somebody else's sales letter. Maybe there's only 3 people that provide this. You don't have a lot of choice there. If you're going to buy it, hey, you're going to buy one of those 3. Whereas now, when there's very many providers, we have high-speed internet, we can quickly look at 25 different offers. What differentiates one offer from another? And my belief is that it's not the hypey words on a sales letter. It's not the lowest price. It's not the letter that screams the loudest. I personally believe it's the relationship that's the tightest. Okay? And in order for us to build that relationship the tightest, we have to use the same principles that we use in building offline relationships. Now, by the way, much of what I'm going to share with you here is going to feel like common sense. You normally would use it in building a relationship, but if you've never thought about applying that particular technique to the online world, there should be an aha moment that says, oh, wow, yeah, I would do that offline. Why don't I do it online? And it's so easy for us to separate the offline world from the online world, and I believe that there's really becoming a convergence there. That in order for us to be good online marketers, we have to think not just more like offline marketers, but like offline people. Marketing is really becoming so much more people to people. I have to make a recommendation for reading. 7 Triggers to Yes by Russell Granger. I wish I had discovered this book before I started internet marketing. Much of what I've learned and done, and much of what Russell teaches in the book, I had to kind of discover the hard way my first few years online, learning to write emails in such a way that they would mimic the offline process. And sometimes I didn't even necessarily realize I was doing that. It was a feedback mechanism. I'd write an email at 9 o'clock in the morning and send it out. If I didn't like the response, I'd write another email and maybe try to find out what was wrong with the earlier response and really try to get people's feelings. Well, when you do that, just like if you're having an offline relationship and somebody feels like they're not getting along very well, and you ask them, is there something wrong? There's a feedback mechanism. I did the same thing with the list the first few years. Then I got a hold of Russell Granger's book, and wow, amazing how Russell is able to really condense so many of those topics. Okay, I'm going to share with you the 7 triggers in the next few minutes, but I believe what may happen is, as you see me share them, you may think, well, I don't need the book now. I have the 7 triggers. Yes, you do need the book. If you want to be an exceptional marketer, buy the book and read it. I've probably read it several times now. I still refer to it from time to time if I'm working on something tough. If I'm having a sticking point in an email campaign, I might pull out Russell's book and take a look at it, reread something in it and go, that makes sense. Why didn't I think of that? It's something I knew and forgot. So trust me, buy the book. You'll enjoy it. I've recommended it a good bit in the past, and it's amazing to me when people read it and they come back and they go, wow, I wish I'd had that book years ago. So just like I said. There's specific things we can do to mimic and serve as an outline for building an online relationship that mirrors building an offline one. So I really dug into this idea of how our online relationship should mirror building the offline one. But let's be honest. Most of the time when we have an offline relationship, unless there's a problem in the relationship and we have to dig into how to solve that problem, most of the things that we do on a regular basis to get along with people, we probably don't even realize that we're doing it. So we don't go out of our way probably to be nice or to be friendly or to be consistent. Hopefully, as humans, we're friendly and consistent, etc., etc. But what happens is we weren't born having an online relationship. Okay, some of the younger people are coming along that way, but I wasn't born that way, and my guess is that you probably weren't born that way either, and so there's this translation that has to happen when we go to building an online relationship. It's kind of like I'm speaking in English right now, and I know a few words in German. If I were to learn a few more and spend a few months in Germany, the first few months I would be spending a lot of time kind of translating things into their language. It wouldn't just come naturally for me. Well, it's the same thing. If no matter how adept you are at offline relationships, when you're learning to build online relationships, there's a translation issue that has to happen. And so what I'm going to be giving you in the course of this training is sort of like that outline and some guidelines for helping you mimic what that offline one is. And I want to be really clear that when I say mimic and serve as an outline, I I don't believe that we should use these tips that I'm going to give you. And by the way, these are really can just serve as a starting point for what you can eventually learn. These are some of the bigger things. These are some of the things that have impacted me the most over the course of the last few years, and some I've really just learned recently. But I don't believe that we should contrive to use these particular techniques and just say, okay, well, I'm just going to package all these techniques into everything I do, and then it'll feel like a real relationship. Well, you're probably still missing the boat. What we want to do is use these as tools to help us with our online relationship. Just like, let's say, we have a job and we have a boss that we don't get along with very well. We don't necessarily go out and get 100 points that we're going to use with this boss and say, okay, I'm going to use this line with him when he says this and this line with him when he says this. But instead we say, okay, what can I do to alleviate some of the pressure and put more peace into this particular conversation? And maybe those serve as guidelines for building that offline relationship. We'd like to have the same thing happen here. So let's go ahead and get started. When we implement these specific techniques, we do it in a way that feels completely natural. We're then able to build relationship and trust. I believe that people buy based on trust and relationship, not based on fancy words on a sales page. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, this idea that I think in kind of the older times, 10, 15 years ago, online, we'd find more of that. If there's two competitors, hey, whoever's got the strongest copy, maybe that person wins, or maybe a little price break wins. In today's business, when you may be competing with 100 or 1,000 other people that frankly, let's be honest, their product is maybe not much differentiated from yours. Now, having said that, I'd love to see that your product is twice as good at changing people's lives than anybody else's. Okay, but unless you've gone out of your way to make that happen, that may not be the case. What's going to differentiate you on your sales page, on your email campaign, in your video campaign from those the other people out there that are selling something that may be very similar to what you're teaching? It's going to probably be the trust and relationship that someone has with you. And I believe the truth of the matter is, if you have a deep relationship with someone that you've built with video, with articles, with email, with sales letters, with discussions, live discussions, teleseminars, webinars, maybe even one-on-one conversations, and you issue a new training, maybe someone doesn't even need to read the entire sales page. They simply trust that if you say this is going to help them, they'll buy it because they trust you. And again, I believe it goes a lot deeper than that. That's just one more example for this concept that I believe people buy based on trust and relationship. And I believe that if you'll have a great product, do at least an okay job of telling people what's going on, but build trust and relationships with people, I believe they'll invest with you. And I believe that that's the case that happens in my business. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you about 26 different things that you can use in your story, and therefore in your email, sales letters, teleseminars, webinars, etc., that build trust and heighten natural anticipation and desire. And keep in mind that as we build our story, we're not building our story for the sake, just the pure sake of being able to tell a story. And our email campaign is not going to be just one big story, nor is our sales letter, teleseminar, webinar, anything else. But once we have our story and we have it completed, and we layer some of these things in, our story becomes tight and it becomes strong, then that story allows us to naturally develop a consistency between our emails, our sales letters, our teleseminars, our webinars, etc., etc. Because of the fact that our story is that common element, if we build everything we do around that story, then it will make everything feel as though it fits together. Okay? I find that sometimes people write a set of emails, not necessarily in a vacuum, but with one purpose in mind. They write a sales letter with another purpose in mind. They write a teleseminar with another purpose in mind. And if someone reads your emails, reads your sales letter, and then listens to a teleseminar, if those three don't agree with each other, then there's going to be this primal alarm that goes off in someone's mind that makes that person think to themselves, there's something wrong here. And then they don't buy. They don't even know why they don't buy. They just know that something doesn't feel right. What doesn't feel right? Well, it could simply be the consistency between the stories in everything that we do. If we start with a story, as we've done in this case, in this training, we start with a story, we build everything based on the story, and then obviously add the elements that make things into an email versus a sales letter or teleseminar, then everything fits together and it feels right. Now, you don't need to do all the things I'm going to share with you, and certainly not all at the same time. Okay, I'm going to share with you 26, actually I think it's 27 different items. In each email you may only use one. In your sales letter you might use 5. In a teleseminar you might use 5 or 6 or 7. So this isn't some game to try to see how many of these 27 things can we throw in. We want it to be natural. It's just like when we're building a relationship with someone. We don't go to 10 different places at one time. We don't have 10 different conversations at one time. It happens naturally over time. Well, it's exactly the same thing that happens with emails and sales letters and teleseminars. It happens naturally over time. So let's start with Russell Granger's triggers. And I told you I was going to give them to you. They're right there on your screen. Okay, and again, when you look at these, friendship, authority, consistency, reciprocity, contrast, reason why, and hope, you can look at these and say, well, I don't need the book. Trust me, get the book. So just touch on each one of these. Okay, and I think many of these don't need a lot of explanation. But let's say friendship. If we have a likability or a liking that happens between us, between two people, then it makes it easier for us to trust that individual. Okay, now this may be more difficult to establish in an email, for example, and yet if we're doing some of these other things, especially if we skip down to number 4, there's a little reciprocity, maybe we're asking some questions, we're available to answer questions, maybe we're creating an illusion of a friendship. And if we do that, we're strengthening that online relationship. Okay? Another trigger is that of authority. Okay? So who do we learn from? We tend to learn from people who know more than we do. Okay? Now, how do we know someone knows more than we do? Well, in a school, they may have more letters behind their name. Okay? They may have more education than we do. Okay? Online, how can someone gauge that you know more than they do? Well, just the act of creating a product, which you're going to hopefully be doing soon, you having a product, they don't have one, creates that perception of authority. Okay? If you've written 10 articles and they have written 0, well, there's a perception of authority and credibility. Okay? So you don't necessarily need to do something that's phenomenal, such as write 10,000 articles or such as have a published book. Okay, although all of those things can build, I just want to be real careful that I don't lead you down a path that says, boy, I got to spend the next year kind of building this authority piece when you can do it fairly quickly. Literally 2 or 3 weeks, you can put the pieces in place to show yourself as being an authority. Consistency is huge. We kind of talked about that earlier, but if we're not consistent in our emails, our sales letters, and our teleseminars, it feels different than an offline relationship. If it feels different, it probably doesn't feel right. If it doesn't feel right, probably not going to make the sale. Reciprocity, this is an easy one. We give something to someone and there's this feeling, especially offline, that we should give something back. Now, I think there's so much giving online, so many free books and recordings and things that this gets weighed down a little bit. I don't know that there's as much of a reciprocity impact online anymore. One of the things I think we can do to overcome that is to give away more value than someone else. Now, I don't mean give away more, you don't want to give somebody, in my opinion, 25 hours worth of information to listen to when they first meet you. They'll never get through it all, and if they never get through it, then maybe they never have a reason to buy anything. Okay? So instead, we give them 45 minutes worth of incredible information they couldn't have gotten from anybody else without investing. Okay? So contrast. Okay, so the power of contrast would be, this idea that, our product is different than someone else's because of some differentiating characteristic. We can even do that with ourselves. Okay, so we can have two products. We can have a $10,000 coaching program where someone could come spend a month in our town or 3 days in our town and speak to us once a week for a year, to make us perhaps feel like it's worth that amount. Okay, and what that does is by having something like that in place, then maybe it allows people to feel like your $500 or $1,000 course is a bargain, especially if the information taught is exactly the same. It just comes with less of you. So really just a wild out there example here of contrast. Sometimes we see that on order pages. We say you can get, there's 3 different versions. There's and this is actually taught in Dan O'Reilly's book, Predictably Irrational. And that, by the way, that's another great book. I think this is in chapter 1, and he does a great job of teaching this. I'll just summarize it real quick. If you have an order page that has, let's say, 3 prices on it for 3 different levels, say $200, $90, and $70, and the $90 package contains almost everything the $200 package contains. Okay, if someone would even consider the $70, they'll probably just go and buy the $90 anyway. Okay, so we could almost think of that as an instant upsell. Okay? So instead of purchasing at $70 and asking them to buy an additional $20 upsell, okay, you just give it all to them and at $90, and we generate whatever that is, a 25% bump in revenue. A reason why. We give people a reason why they should do whatever you're asking them to do. You tend to build trust and relationship that way. And then hope's a big one. If someone's reading your emails or reading your sales letter and you don't give them any hope for the future, why should they invest with you? Okay, and trust me, 7 Triggers to Yes by Russell Granger goes into incredible detail on all of these. That's just a quick review. Now we'll add in some more that I personally use. These are things that I use in my marketing. Okay, and really, probably most of these I do in real life without even thinking about it. Okay, and one concept is that of moving from scenario to scenario, and that we can mimic that online. And I don't want to go into tons of detail on this, but I want you to imagine, I want you to think about the idea that generally when we build a relationship with someone, we spend time in different venues to do that. Okay, so maybe we have coffee at a coffee shop, we have lunch at a lunch joint, we have a meeting in a conference room, and then maybe we also have a meeting in our office. So there's 4 different locations, and that may happen over the course of a month. Okay, so we're considering a business relationship, and we have these 4 meetings over the course of a month, and at the end of the month we look back and it looks like we've spent a good bit of time with this person. And I want you to contrast that with simply meeting in a conference room for 4 times over the course of the month, or simply having coffee 4 times over the course of the month. There will probably be, and likely in your mind right now, there's this idea that because of the fact that we've met in various locations, we believe, irrational as this may be, but we believe somewhere deep in our subconscious that we trust this person a little bit more, that there's a deeper level of relationship just by being in different locations with the same individual. We could also imagine, what we can do, we can speed this up offline. So let's say that we're going to close kind of a big deal. It's a business scenario, but we're going to close kind of a big deal. We want to do it today. Normally it would take a month to do this. We'd meet somebody for coffee, we'd have lunch, we'd go play golf, and we'd meet in a conference room. Okay, it only take us a month, and we finally sign the deal. We need to do it today. Okay, now, if we meet in a coffee shop, we're probably not going to close a deal today. Now, if we meet in a coffee shop, and after 20 minutes or half an hour, we suggest having lunch, and we move to the lunch joint next door. Okay? We stop thinking about our business, we eat. Okay? Maybe we talk about something in common, whether it's a football game or something else that's relevant. Okay? And then we say, hey, let's get back to business. We're mimicking the idea of having another meeting 1 week later. Okay, now, let's say that we are committed to doing this today. We're both committed on both sides. We're committed to figuring it out. Normally it would take a month. We need to do it in a day. Now we're starting to get tired. What if we were to get up and take a walk over to the local yogurt shop? Okay, take a break, and then maybe go back to the coffee shop. If you can envision this in your mind, the depth that's being built into that day resembles what might happen over the course of the month, and we probably have a better chance of closing that business deal today. We can mimic the same thing online. Okay, so online, we can send someone to a website, have them read an email, have them watch a video, have them come to a teleseminar over the course of a month. Or we can put all those things into 2 or 3 days. We can build some of those things very, very quickly on the first day. Okay, so if we think about the idea, and if we just take something from my business, having someone read an article before they even get to my website, by moving them from the article, which is on someone else's website, to my website, we increase the power of this concept right here. Okay? Now, once they're on my website, if I now move them to a third-party website to watch a video, I increase the power of this scenario right here, and I can do this in 15 minutes. After they watch that video on another place, maybe I then invite them to a teleseminar or webinar, or even a replay edition of something that they can watch in the next hour or two, give them some time to take a break. I'm able to mimic this month-long relationship building process in 3 hours and bring them closer to being able to make a trust-based decision to work with me. Now, let's move on to number 9 here. And again, all of these are just arbitrarily numbered. Obviously numbered Russell's 1 through 7 because there's 7, and I simply put his first because I think they form a nice foundation for this discussion. These right here don't necessarily belong in any order as well, and the ones I'm going to share with you in a few minutes that I've taken from another book. Again, they could have been placed first. I just want to be real careful that even though I've numbered these sequentially, I don't know that any of these have a special order in which they should be done. In fact, I know that they do not. Okay, so another thing we can do is refer to the past and to the future. So we just pull 9 and 10 together. What happens when we refer to the past and to the future is we build a bigger mental construct for how deep our relationship is. So when we refer to the past and we refer to the future, okay, we refer to the pain or the pleasure of the past, and we refer to the hope and the anticipation of the future. We build the size and the depth of the mental construct we have with someone. So if we're able to do that in an email campaign over the course of 3 or 4 days, referring to the past email and referring to the future email. If we do that in a sales letter, referring to the past. You saw me do it just a moment ago, not because I'm attempting to use any kind of psychology here, but because it's a natural thing for me to do, to refer to the past. I refer to this idea of what I do in my own business, which is move people from an article to on another site to my own site. Well, I'm thinking about the past there. Then when we talk about the future, I've future-paced some of what we're going to be talking about today in my discussion. It's something that naturally occurs in my natural conversation. And if you can be impactful or intentional about doing that in your emails, in your sales letters, in your teleseminars, I think what you'll find is that people will develop a more holistic view of their relationship with you. 11, empathy. This is just the concept of someone feeling as though we've been through, or we understand what they're going through. Okay, so remember, when you're the coach and your client is the client, and you've created that authority, you've created that credibility, okay, you almost create a space between you and them. You're able to close that by referring to a time when you or a client have been through what they've been through. Okay, 12, use their language. Okay, so, we want to be really careful that if, let's say we're a professional, or professional in our field, with each other, we may use a specific sort of language, but our clients may not understand that language. We want to use our client's language. Okay? And then if we'll ask questions and answer questions, that helps us mimic what goes on naturally in the offline world. In the offline world, when we're building a relationship, we ask questions and we answer questions. Okay? There's one thing I didn't include in here because I don't do a lot of it, but a lot of people do, and a lot of people really believe it's a critical part of building a relationship, and who knows, it may well be, and that is small talk. Okay? I'm not big on small talk, and so I don't build it into my construct. Okay, but if we were to have a 13.5 here, well, that might be small talk. Why? Well, we use that offline, so if we use that online, it helps build that relationship. Next, I'm going to show you some of the things I learned in the book Wired for Story by Lisa Crone. And I specifically use these in building my own hero's journey story and adapting it for the video series. Now, keep in mind, everything I've been showing you can be layered into emails, sales pages, webinars, etc., even into your conversation. And when these become a natural and comfortable part of your conversation, your subscribers and others around you will begin to trust you more, and hence they feel more comfortable to take action with you. I do want to say this, that what I'm getting ready to share with you from Wired for Story, like what I said about the 7 triggers to yes, I wish these were things I'd learned a long time ago. And these are things that I specifically dug into and learned specifically for the purpose of putting together the video series that preceded some of the marketing that kind of goes along with this training, or that went along with this training. Simply because I was looking at doing something new and different, much of which I've shared with you in the hero's journey, in the story making, and the storyboarding, and all of that. Okay, but I wanted to take things a little bit deeper, and so I dug deeper, and I found this book. I highly recommend that you purchase this book as well, Wired for Story by Lisa Crone. If you don't have 25 aha moments as you're reading the book, read it again. I mean, it's powerful. It's really, really powerful. And what I'm getting ready to share with you is about 10 one-line excerpts, paraphrased excerpts from the book. And if any one of these strikes a chord with you, I believe you'll love the book. So these specific things that I'm going to share with you, these 4 and maybe 4 or 5 more, are things that I specifically thought about as I built my own story here, in terms of how can I add this into the story to strengthen the story. Okay, so number 15, nothing focuses the mind like surprise. Okay, and Lisa goes into probably a page or 2 about this concept, that if we surprise our reader, and remember, she's primarily talking about writing a story. I'm adapting it for everything that we're doing. Okay, and it's certainly the psychological concepts are the same. But when we surprise someone, what happens to our focus? So if we just want to create an example, okay, imagine that you look up and there's a scorpion on your desk. Imagine surprise, scorpion. What happens to all of your focus right now? It's on the scorpion. Okay, same thing when we're watching the news and there's a news flash that there's been an earthquake or hurricane or something. Okay, it's surprise, and it totally focuses our attention. When we do the same thing in a book, and we read a book, if there's a surprise on the first page, boy, it can keep us hooked for a long time. 16. And I believe this is a direct quote from the book. From the very first sentence, we need to catch sight of the breadcrumbs trail that will lead us deeper. We think about that for our video. We think about that for our sales letter. We think about that for what we're sharing. The very first slide that someone sees from you, they need to get a glimpse of that breadcrumbs trail that's going to lead all the way through your video. It's going to lead all the way through your story. That's going to lead all the way through your sales material. It's going to lead all the way through your email campaign. Okay, so whatever your niche is, if you write a 25 email campaign, you don't want to have a different topic for every email. Or if you do, maybe you're doing a sampling type of thing. you've really got to tie all those pieces together, and they've all got to relate back to what people came to your email campaign for in the first place. 17. For story to grab us, not only must something be happening, but also there must be a consequence we can anticipate. And that's on page 13. I believe that's another direct quote. For story to grab us, not only must something be happening, but also there must be a consequence we can anticipate. It's probably self-explanatory here, but I'll dig a little bit deeper here. You know, if we're reading a story about a ball game, perhaps, we're anticipating that our team is going to win or lose. I don't know about you, but I have a very difficult time watching a ball game when I already know who won, when I already know the score, because there's no anticipation. It's the same concept here. The same thing should occur in your sales material, in your story. There's a consequence someone can anticipate, and that allows our story to grab them. Okay. Now, number 18 is also on page 13 of Lisa's book, and this is paraphrased out of about a paragraph and a half. On the first page of your book, okay, your first slide of your video, a ball has to be in place. It doesn't have to be the only ball, but it has to feel like the only ball at that time, and it has to have our complete attention. This goes back to surprise. In order for us to be completely engaged, in order for your client to be completely engaged in your video so that they watch your video and not multitask and read texts and listen to somebody else's video at the very same time, our video, our story, our teleseminar, our sales page has to feel like the only ball, and it has to have our complete attention, or have their complete attention. Okay. Page 18. Lisa says something must be at stake on the first page. A conflict that is specific to the protagonist's quest. Okay, now our protagonist is probably our hero in our story. Okay, and remember, our hero is probably going to be someone that our client or our prospect can identify with. Okay, now, why does our prospect or our client want to possibly do business with us? Well, because they have a conflict. If they didn't have a conflict, if they didn't have problems in their life or their business or their health, they wouldn't need us. And if they don't need us, they won't read our emails, and they won't read our sales pages, and they won't watch our videos. So if they're watching our videos and they're reading our emails and they're reading our sales letters and they're talking with us, they probably have a conflict. We are going to mirror or mimic that conflict in the protagonist's quest, in our hero's quest. We are going to have a conflict that should resemble that of our prospect or client. Pages 26 through 27, Lisa talks about this idea that the story isn't about the protagonist achieving his goal per se, but about what she has to overcome internally to do it. I believe that's another direct quote. Again, this goes back to this idea of a conflict. When we watch a football game, when we read a murder mystery, we don't just read the first page or watch the first play of the game and then skip to the last page or the last play of the game and go, okay, they won or lost, or we found the murderer or we didn't. But the 300 pages, the 3 hours between the beginning and the end, or the 300 pages between the beginning and the end, is all about what our heroes have to overcome internally to do it. This is a football game. The players have to overcome something internally to do it. If they don't play at their very best, they probably won't win the game. Okay? If our detective in our murder mystery does not overcome whatever conflict may be involved in finding the murderer won't be found. Okay? And so the story, our video, is all about what has to happen and overcome internally. And if we can show that our hero and our prospect, via the proxy of our hero in our story, is able to overcome that internally, and they are able to believe it, then they may take action to work with us. Okay, and by the way, just want to let you know, these were my personal notes. All of this is these 2 pages, my personal notes as I was studying the book to apply to my story and the work that I did. And this next line, I couldn't find it in the book. I believe it's another direct quote from the book. I I can't find it. I'll give obviously complete credit here, but I couldn't find it. When we are fully engaged in a story, our boundaries dissolve. We can be the protagonist, wanting what she wants and fearing what she fears. Now, you can see that I had to include this here because it ties everything up for us, and especially 19 and 20 here. We have a conflict that I stated in line 19, and in 20, we talked about overcoming internally whatever it is to overcome that conflict. In 21, whether this is a story, a video, a sales letter, whatever the case is, if we are fully engaged, our boundaries dissolve, and we are no longer feeling as though we're watching the video, but we're a part of the video. We're no longer reading the sales page, but we're engaged in the sales page. Then we can be the protagonist. We, as the client, perhaps, in this case, we can be the hero. Wanting what the hero wants and fearing what the hero fears. If we can fully engage our prospects in our story in such a way that their boundaries dissolve and they want what our story, what the protagonist, what the hero in our story wants, and they fear what our hero fears, then when it comes time to taking action like the hero did, our prospect will take action. Okay? So I put 22 in here as a reminder to myself to really dig into what's going on here with the conflict. Okay? We must go through the conflict of the hero, of the protagonist in our story, whether we do it in our sales page, our video, our email campaign, etc., etc. We must develop that conflict in such a way that our prospect believes they can mirror that process. You see, if our prospect does not believe that they can do whatever it is we're asking them to do when they purchase, perhaps, when they become involved with us, they're not going to become involved. 23, the story is about something changing before and after. You see, there's a before and an after, and we really dug into this when we went into this hero's journey. Okay? So the ordinary world is the beginning of the hero's journey. That's the before. And the after is what happens after we've gone through that dragon's den, after we have gone through the ordeal, after we've had the battle, after we've overcome things internally. The story is about the change. The story is not about the beginning and the end. The story is about the change. It's about everything that's in between. Okay, so now kind of back to me. These are things that I personally use in my marketing, and I believe that these are powerful. Number 24, be willing to admit mistakes when we're wrong. I don't believe in conjuring up mistakes for the purpose of proving our humanness. We're going to make mistakes anyway. Okay, but the simple act of acknowledging that mistake simply shows us to be human. When we're human, someone might want to do more business with us. Okay, and again, I want to be real careful. We're not doing all of this just somebody can do business with us. We're doing all of this so that people can identify with the story, so that they can identify with the hero. And if they do, and if doing business with us makes sense, then it becomes easy for them to make that decision. And in my mind, this separates what we're doing here from being overly aggressively persuasive and perhaps using persuasive or arm-twisting language to get people to do what we want them to do versus what they want to do. Instead, we allow them to be drawn into a story that is so much like what they want to do that working with us becomes part of what they want to do. Okay? 25. Talked about this with Russell Granger's consistency concept. We must build our entire story so it's entirely consistent across all mediums. And if we use our story as our anchor, as our pivot, then our emails, our sales letter, our webinars, our teleseminars, everything will fit into that story. Everything will build around that story, and they'll all fit together and link together well. 26. We must build our entire story so that buying is a foregone conclusion, not something to be decided on. And this kind of goes back to this idea of when we allow our prospect to be drawn into the story of our hero, a story that matches their story, every piece matches up. In order for that story to be complete for your prospect, they will have to buy. They will have to invest because if they don't, their story will be incomplete. Therefore, buying should be a foregone conclusion. It should not be something they have to decide on later. Okay, notice that as they're reading our story, whether it's a sales letter, an email, they're hearing our story in a teleseminar, perhaps they're participating in our story in a webinar or a live event, whatever the case may be, they don't have to decide on any part of that story. It's all right there for them. So why should getting involved with us be any different? They shouldn't have to decide. Investing with us and getting involved with us should simply be the next step in the story. It should not even be the conclusion of the story. What's the conclusion of the story? The conclusion of the story is your client having ultimate success and changing their life. So buying is not even the end. I think sometimes we think of when somebody invests with us, we've done our job, we've closed them, so to speak. But in reality, that shouldn't be the case. Buying should simply be a continuation of the story. The rest of the story happens when our prospect becomes the hero. Our prospect moves from their ordinary world with our mentor, us, through trials and tribulations and tests and enemies and allies to the dragon's den, fights, has an ordeal, and comes back a changed person. That completes their story. And in fact, if we think about it, that's not even the end of their story. They now become in some way responsible to begin to share their story with others. So in a way, it's a never-ending story, and the part that they're going to spend with us is a small part of a very big story in their life. If we can think about it and we can act on it in this way, we will find that our teleseminar, our webinar, our sales letter is not just some standalone piece that we hope people vote yes on, but instead it's a part of an ongoing relationship, and purchasing from us as a part of that relationship is a foregone conclusion. Okay, and then 27. We must completely believe our own story in order for the most number of people to believe with us. Okay, now what's the easiest way to believe our own story? Well, to tell an accurate story, to tell our story the way that it occurred. Okay, so why all of the story learning exercises that we've done if we're simply going to tell our own story? Okay, because let's face it, most people are not natural storytellers. Most people tell, can we call it what it is, a dry story? Okay? Just the facts. But if we think about our own story, whatever that story is, whether it's the last 3 years of our life, the last 3 years of a challenge we've had in our health, the last 3 years in our business, the last 6 months, the last 5 years, whatever, did our story just have the facts? Or did our story include emotions and feelings and struggles and fear and anger and happiness and joy? Yes. In fact, our story is probably 90 or 95 or maybe even 99% emotion and fear and anger and happiness and joy. The facts are only maybe 1%. And yet when in our natural, we might, without any training, we may think, okay, if I'm going to tell my story, I'm just going to tell the facts. But if all we do is tell the facts and we don't layer on the emotion and we don't layer on these psychological elements, we don't layer in the application of the hero's journey, then all we have is probably going to be a very, very, very dry story. And if it's a dry story, although it may be believable, although certainly it could be true, hopefully it is our story, our true story, okay, it will not be engaging. And if it's not engaging, our prospect won't identify with it. Our prospect their boundaries won't dissolve as we see here. They won't want what we wanted, they won't fear what we feared, and they won't want to take the action that we took. Okay, so, sum up, we must completely believe our own story, including the emotional elements. And this may mean digging into our story. You see, when we think of our own story, or if we're telling the story of a fictional character, if we're telling the story of a client, we may know the facts, but we may have forgotten the fears. We may have forgotten the emotion. We may have forgotten some of the action. And we may have to spend time on our story digging back into that fear and asking, how did I feel? What emotion did I have? What fear did I have of taking action when the mentor called? And so on and so on. And then once we've dug into those feelings and that emotion, we must then make sure that we completely agree with and believe everything that we dug into. Okay, because sometimes no matter how true it is, if we dig into it, but we haven't thought about it in 5 years, it may be something that we remember for a moment, but it's not a deep thought. We may not even completely still believe it. So we want to make sure that everything that we load into our story to share with others is not only true, but at a subconscious and a deep level, we also believe it. Because if we don't believe it, they won't believe it. Okay? And the corollary, obviously, to that is that we have to completely believe our own story in order for the most number of prospects and people to believe with us. Okay, so how do we layer this into our story? We're going to take these elements. Okay, so if we look right here, you've been taking notes. Okay, you have these right here on screen. You're going to take these. Maybe you're going to write them all down. And what's going to happen is when you go through your story, you're going to ask yourself, how can I layer some of these things in? How can I layer some credibility and authority into my story? How can I layer in some contrast? How can I layer in some reason why and some hope? Okay, and I'm going to demonstrate this when we go back to the storyboard that's outside the confines of this specific training, and I want to try to stick to the topic here so that it's self-contained and easy for you to assimilate. If you can just imagine layering each of these items onto your story. Okay, so maybe you could have the idea, you say, well, how can we go from scenario to scenario as we're telling our story? So maybe when we're telling our story, instead of telling it in a really dry fashion, not indicating where we are as we go through our story, let's say we've had a problem with our health. And we could say, boy, I felt really bad one day. One way to do it would be, boy, I felt really bad one day, and then I talked to a doctor another day, and then I thought I was going to die another day, and then I met someone that gave me the solution. Now, what if we were to layer this in? I was in the kitchen cooking, and I was specifically cooking lasagna, and it was going to be really good, and I couldn't finish because I had to be rushed to the hospital, and we were creating a scenario. So now we're moving to the hospital, and we have a conversation with the doctor, and we color that doctor. Okay, the doctor was wearing a white coat, and he or she has dark hair and angry eyes or caring eyes, or what we're doing is we're moving from scenario to scenario. Okay, so we refer to the past in our story, we refer to the future, we use empathy. We may find ways, if we're doing a longer story, a 2-hour story, we're writing a book, we may find we can use much of this. Okay, and then what we have from Lisa in Wired for Story, we can ask ourselves as we're writing this, is there a surprise? Do we have a surprise here? Or is this just a dull, boring solution? Okay. What about the breadcrumbs? Is there a breadcrumb trail that goes through our entire webinar, our entire video, our entire sales letter? Okay. Is there a consequence that we can anticipate? Is there a ball in place? Are we showing our hero overcoming things internally and spelling out what those are? So we can ask ourselves these questions. Are we doing these things? Okay. How can we use our story? Now, I've obviously alluded to this a lot, but the idea here is that when we write our email campaign is going to tell our story, but it's going to tell it over time. Okay. So instead of telling our entire, 50-minute story in one email, instead, we build on that story over 25 emails and give 2 minutes apiece. We can do the same thing in video. We can build towards, let's say we are going to build towards a webinar. We can start with a couple emails. We can lead into 2 5-minute videos that tell a little bit more of the story. We create anticipation and hope that on the video we'll reveal the rest of the story. And then we do. We close that loop. We tell the rest of the story in the webinar, But the story is still open. Remember, our entire story that we lead our hero through is not just our webinar. It's not just our sales letter. That's a small part of it. Okay? The natural conclusion to the webinar should be to invest with us so that they can continue the story by continuing to work with us. So just as one email leads to the next, the second email perhaps leads to a 5-minute video that leads to another 5-minute video that leads to a webinar. The webinar leads to working with us so that we can continue the story. The webinar is not the end. The webinar simply leads us to the next place in that story. Okay? How do we maintain flexibility in our story? I think that the way that we do this is that if we dig into the emotions and the feelings that we had when we overcame whatever our challenge was that we overcame, we're going to find that when we excerpt a portion of that story, there will be a natural flexibility in, let's say we're summarizing something in 2 minutes, or we're extracting a certain portion, okay, then we're going to have to be flexible in how we tell that. Not flexible with the truth, but we may be flexible with the level of emotion that we add in or we leave out. Okay, again, if we're building from, say, a 2-minute email to a 3-minute email to a 4-minute video to a 7-minute video to a 90-minute webinar to 6 months of working with us, each one of those is going to be flexible in that each one is going to build on the one before, and the piece before is going to leave out everything from the future, not necessarily because we want to hold anything back, although we may want to, but simply because in 2 minutes we can't share as much as we can in 3. In 3, we can't share as much as we can in 5, and so on. How do we maintain consistency? I think we go back to this idea of believing our own story. If we believe our own story, if we know what the facts are, we know what the emotions are, we can tell that story again and again and again in email. We can tell it in a webinar. We can tell it in a teleseminar. We can tell it in an interview. We can tell it in something totally unscripted. We can tell it on a personal call. Why? Because we know what the facts are, we know what the emotions are, and we believe in it, and it allows us to be completely consistent all the way through our story. So, where do we kind of leave this for you? Obviously, this training is probably the most teaching intensive of any of the trainings, and I believe that as you're building your story, and as I'll model that when we go back to storyboarding, then you'll be able to kind of see how I do this. I hesitate to give you an exact homework assignment for today, simply because of the timing of where things are. We're sort of at our storyboard right now. We haven't completed that. Okay, and then our next few steps are going to be creating our product and our offer. And what we're going to do, instead of doing a specific homework assignment today, over the course of these next few days, we will layer in these triggers. We'll layer in some of the psychological elements I use. We'll layer in some of these story and hero and conflict elements from Lisa. We'll layer all of these things in to everything that we do. So this is more of a, in fact, if I were to give you one piece of homework, it would be to take everything I've just shared with you and consolidate it onto a sheet of paper, a notebook, somewhere that you can refer back to in the future when you're building your story, when you're building that sales letter, when you're finishing up a sales letter and you go, wow, this feels incomplete. You can go back to this list of 27 things, say, hey, how can I add some of these components in so that I'm able to make this sales letter stronger, this webinar stronger, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, over the course of the next few days, we're going to pull everything else together. We're going to tie it all together so that it's complete, so that your story is complete, so that your product is able to be complete, and so that when you're telling it as a sales story, it will also be complete.